Hi, everybody. I assume the people can hear me. Seems to be the case. Uh, my name's Kurt. I am uh, coming to you from Rockville, Maryland, and it's great to be here with everyone. I always say that. Everybody always says that, but it really is true. Meditation practice, uh, Zen practice, Buddhist practice, Dharma practice, whatever you want to call this, whatever it is that we're doing. It's tremendously rewarding. It's tremendously helpful, but it's also uh, it requires effort. It requires a lot of effort, and really more than requiring effort, it requires a lot of help. It requires a lot of encouragement. Requires a lot of support, and the most important kind of uh, encouragement and support that any of us can have in this practice is just the presence of others, just the practice of others, joining together and doing this together. Uh, it doesn't just help. I mean, it makes it possible. It really does. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but I am relatively certain that I'm speaking for others as well, saying that it's really this practice for me would not be possible without um, the participation and the help and the encouragement of others, all of you. Thank you. Um, that's not all I have to say, but I think that's possibly the most important thing I have to say. But in directly connected to that, I do want to talk about other opportunities that we have to practice together. I want to make some plugs, right? Um, First of all, I think very importantly, there's a retreat coming up, an in-person retreat, also known as a real retreat, right? Coming up at Furnace Mountain in just a month, the weekend of Thursday, April 20th through Sunday, April 23rd. And there are spots still open. That's right. There's spots still open, correct? Zen Master Dagak, shake your head. Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. Um, and I think that there's going to be another in-person retreat in May as well, or at least that's you know uh, hopeful. I mean, it's all hopeful, right? I mean, a month from now, who knows? The world. Let's hope and pray that in April there will be a retreat, and in May there will be a retreat that people can come to in person. Um, and looking around at all of the little squares on our Zoom meeting, I see familiar faces, and so I know a lot of what I'm going to say is already known to you, but it never hurts. So the first other opportunity I want to talk about is the Mahasangha morning sitting every weekday morning, Monday through Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern time, um, which uh, I always try to come. I've been having some health problems lately. I'm currently on my not that anybody asked, but I'm currently on my third round of antibiotics and my second round of prednisone to try to clear up a middle ear infection, which has put a bit of a cramp in my style. I'm feeling a lot better, so I've been coming to the morning sittings again. There was quite a while where I just needed to get more sleep, but coming to the that virtual sitting every morning on at 7 a.m. on weekdays has been a um, uh, real blessing to me, a real foundation of my practice. It's become something I rely heavily upon, um, and and I'll tell you, there are mornings when I hit the snooze button a couple times too many, and 6:55, I can still, just jump up, rush to my computer, click on that link, and just sit there. And morning, uh, morning is actually a good time to practice, a really good time to practice. Um, the mind is a little quieter. The body is surprisingly, at least to me, a little more cooperative. The world around us is a little quieter. Um, it's a great time to practice, and but it's not the easiest time to get yourself to practice, at least in my opinion, at least in my experience. And so having that online group that I don't have to go anywhere, I don't have to get, I don't even, there are times when I hit the snooze button again, and it's 7:05, and you can still come, you can come late, it's not particularly encouraged, but I've done it many times. Um, and it's wonderful. There are many weeks when I don't get there every morning, but and even if you can just come once or twice in a week, it's really helpful. But sometimes some people have to be on their way to work. Some people are already at work, and some people are still asleep. You know, whatever. And that's another thing that I really want to talk about, get around to talking about in this talk, is about how important it is for us to we make our own practice. And there's just no two ways about it. You can find the greatest teacher in the world who will tell you exactly what you should do. Maybe. And actually, if you find the greatest teacher in the world, it's probably not someone who will be telling you exactly what to do, but they can give you lots of good advice, lots of direction, lots of instruction. It's ultimately, it's still up to us. It's still up to me. Um, and I'll just tell you one story I remember. Um, uh, Zen Master Degak often uh, uh, one thing that many Zen teachers do during a retreat, during an in-person retreat, a real retreat. This is a real retreat, right? It's all real. It's or not real. But uh, one thing that many Zen teachers do. My very first Zen teacher, she was a yoga teacher, and so she was very hands-on. And she would go around the room correcting people's posture, right? And she would grab me by the shoulders and put her knee in my back and just, oh my God, just straight, because I have terrible, terrible posture. And she just took one look at me and said, I could fix this. And so Zen Master Degak also does the same, much less aggressively. Um, and one time someone asked him, so sometimes when you do that, Zen Master Degak, it gets me into a position that isn't really, you know, right for me. So what should I do? And Zen Master Degak says, that's not a problem. Just wait until I'm a couple people down. Don't do it right in my face, but wait until I'm a couple people down, and then just readjust your posture the way it needs to be. You know, and so that's good advice. I mean, it's always wonderful. If you can find a teacher who is willing to go there. Willing to help you, willing to you know uh, try to bend you the right way, um, which is risky business. Um, but it's still up to you to say, well, that's not working, and find what does work. Only I can find my path. Um, uh, yeah. So it's good to find other people to practice with. It's good to find a teacher that you feel connected to. It's good to find a tradition. You know, uh, uh, you know, Craig Learned, my dear Dharma brother, talked earlier about the Korean tradition, which is a wonderful tradition. But still, you got to, you can't just say, well, you still have to kind of say, well, let's see, because it's still up to me to decide what's right for me. And if you buy into the Korean tradition, then guess what? You find out, oh, great, the greatest Zen masters in Korea today and from the past, they argue with each other. They disagree. They one of the greatest Zen masters in modern Korean history is on the record. He wrote a book that's like one of the top links on the Jogei Order's English website. Jogei Order, it's like KoreanBuddhism.net or something. I don't know what it is, but anyway, if you go there, you uh, click on this link to this book written by I can't remember his name now, um, but so he was the head of the Chogi order for most of the time when Zen Master Sung San was a monk. But uh, according to him, the worst thing that ever happened to Korean Buddhism was Chinul, Zen Master Chinul. He says in his book, in his autobiography, which is a bestseller in Korea, he says, there have been no great Zen masters in Korea since Chinul because of Chinul. And because, he says, it's because Chinul taught, and this is getting in a little inside baseball for Korean Zen or Zen in general. He says, because Chinul taught sudden enlightenment, gradual cultivation. Ever since then, no more great Zen masters in Korea because of that. It's only sudden enlightenment, sudden cultivation is the only way. And if that doesn't make sense to you, then consider yourself lucky. Um, but um, but the only reason I mention that is because if you are fortunate enough to find a tradition, a teacher, a group that you connect to, and you say, yes, this is it. It's still up to you. You still have to sort through it for yourself, because you'll find, oh, that's not correct Korean Buddhism, or that's not what Zen Master Sun San taught, or that's not the way Zen Master got. People have ideas, even people who are supposed to be beyond having ideas. Often, it turns out, have some very strong ideas. But so that's not really what I want to emphasize. I do want to emphasize the importance of feeling a connection, finding people to practice with, but not in the sense that that's going to, they're going to do it for you. They can help you. And in my experience is that I need help. I need a lot of help, encouragement, support. And I need to hear what other people's opinions are. I need guidance. It's like having a good friend. Take Zen and Buddhism or anything out of it. A good friend, you need their advice, but you can't always just follow it. If you're sick, you need a good doctor. But, you still have to think for yourself. I've, unfortunately, between my wife and I, have had more than enough experience with the medical profession over the last year to know that, ultimately you have to, this is an important lesson as we get older, actually, that you have to watch out for yourself, even when you're in the care of very expert physicians and nurses and medical professionals. No, that was too long of a digression. I want to go back to recommending groups and things that are good. Having put a big asterisk next to it, that you're still on your own. But so the retreats coming up at Furnace Mountain, the morning group. There's a wonderful group that meets on Monday nights, based in Galveston, Texas, where they meet at 6 o'clock Texas time, which happens to be 7 o'clock on the East Coast, and I am usually there virtually. That's a great group. So that's in Galveston, Texas. Lexington has a group that meets on Sundays at 4 Eastern time. The Cincinnati group has a bunch of meetings, including virtual. Like at least 2 virtual meetings a week now, don't you? Well, yeah. So, which usually I don't, almost never make it to those. Excuse me, here's my middle ear infection, raising its ugly head a little bit. I forgot to mention at the beginning, if you don't want to see my face quite so large on your screen, you should see in the upper right hand corner a little button that says view, and you can change that to gallery view if you want to be able to see other people's faces. But As the announcement said at the beginning of this talk, you are being recorded. But as long as I'm in spotlight mode, I'm the only one whose face and name should be getting recorded. Um, oh, there's another group, the Rockville, Maryland group, um, which meets on Wednesday nights and Saturday mornings. The funny thing about the Rockville, Maryland group, I'm the only person in Rockville, Maryland currently sitting with that group. We have one other person in Maryland who sits with us virtually, and we've got a couple people in DC and one person in Virginia and two people in Colorado who sit with that group. And so everyone is invited to join these, especially the virtual groups, but also the in-person group if you can get there in person. Am I leaving anyone out? Are there any other virtual or in-person? Well, I think there's a new um, sitting group in Wilmington. I don't know if anybody here is with the Wilmington group. I don't think they have a virtual sitting though, as far as I know. And there are other satellite groups here and there. Sometimes they pop up and sometimes they go away. Um, uh, it's good to have people to practice with. Well, good. It's important. It's necessary to have people to practice with. So one thing that you can do, I'm gonna, yeah. Oh, let me tell a story. I told this story on Thursday, but it's worth telling again. Told this story on Thursday at uh, the virtual Mahasangha Thursday morning. I'll give the short version. There was a guy who became a student of the Buddha. When the Buddha was alive 2,500 years ago, became a monk, and so he became a monk. He left lay life and entered into the monastic community and practiced as a monk for 5 years and felt like he was making real progress. Um, but after 5 years, he had become a monk in order to get away from the distractions and the demands of lay life. But now he found monastic life to be full of distractions and demands. Everybody had a job on the work schedule. Everybody had to get up at the same time. There was a lot of regimentation, a lot of and just a lot of people around. Monasteries can be very noisy places, extremely noisy, busy, busy, busy. Also, full of gossip, intrigue, power plays. Monasteries often raise a lot of money. Um, Monasteries often make political connections with whoever the local people in power are. You don't want to pay taxes, or you want to, get good rates on your construction jobs or whatever. Um, and you know, I mean, those are all real things. I'm not just kind of making that up, um, uh, but monastery is not really that much different. It's just a different community that you're living in. It's a different group of people that you're around who are having a different kind of interactions and distractions, and or at least this was this monk's experience. And so he asked the Buddha's permission to go off and practice on his own in the woods. And this is something that was very common in the Buddha's time, and still to this day. People dedicate themselves to more or less solitary practice. Hermits or forest dwellers, or whatever you want to call them. And the Buddha had many students, monks and nuns, who did this kind of solitary forest dwelling practice. And so this young monk, still fairly young, asked the Buddha's permission to go off and do this. The Buddha said, "Sure, go for it," and he did. And for 12 years, he basically beat his head against the wall and didn't feel like he was getting anywhere. Which is a long time to feel like you're not getting anywhere. Um, and then one day, so he wasn't completely isolated. When someone goes off into the woods, you have to send somebody out every once in a while, at least to find out if they're still alive, or if they need help or something. I mean, um, and so every once in a while, someone would come and visit. And on one visit, after 12 years, uh, he was visited by another monk, someone that he didn't know, but he could tell by the monk's accent that he was from his region, his home region. And so he asked, if he knew about this particular village, and the monk said, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I know people in that village." And then, without telling him, who he was, he said, "Have you ever heard of the so and so family?" He said, "Oh yeah, no, I know about that family. Yeah, they're on really hard times. Ever since their son left to become a monk, it's just been downhill for them, and now they're completely impoverished. They're living on the streets. Um, he was their only son, and they were doing really well before he left, but now people just took advantage of them. Since and the older they got, the more people took advantage of them, and with no uh, without their son there to help them and look out for them, they've just fallen into just terrible times. Yeah, no, it's a bad scene." And the monk was just devastated by this news. And so he went to the Buddha and asked for permission to leave his monastic uh, life and return to lay life to help his parents. And the Buddha said, "Yes, of course, but just wait until tomorrow. Then you can go." And that night, uh, the Buddha gave a talk about the importance of taking care of one's parents. Uh, and he didn't direct anything directly at this monk, at this young man who wasn't, who is now kind of early middle-aged man. Uh, but as the Buddha was talking, this monk realized that it wasn't necessary for him to have one or the other. That he could keep his monastic vows and still return home. He could uh, uh, build his own little hut and build a little hut for his parents, and then he could continue to collect alms as a monk. And so what he did was he did that. He went back to his hometown, still as a monk, uh, still keeping his monastic vows, and he built a tiny little hut for himself and a slightly larger hut for his parents and some abandoned land. And then he would go out every day on his begging rounds as a monk. And whatever he collected, he would then give to his parents. And then he would go out again, and he wouldn't get so much the second time around because people would say, "Wait a minute, we saw he would go to maybe a different part of town, but still word got around that this monk was double dipping." And then people looked into it a little bit further, and they found out that he was giving some of his alms to lay people, which is completely, totally forbidden. Um, and so, of course, he got reported to the Buddha, and the Buddha heard the story and said, "Just bring him to me. I want to talk to him." And so the monk, and in the story, that we don't know this guy's name. It isn't recorded. In any of the versions that I've seen. Um, so he came to the Buddha, and the Buddha said, "Is it true that you've been collecting alms as a monk and then giving them to lay people?" And the monk says, "Yes, Buddha. Yes, I have been doing that." And and the Buddha said, "Well, who are these lay people? Who are you giving it to?" And the monk told him, "My parents. They were starving, and so I gave them, what I collected." And And then the Buddha looked at the people who had brought, this monk, basically brought him up on charges, and brought him to, the equivalent of put him on trial by having him being examined by the Buddha. And the Buddha says to the people who had, accused this monk of impropriety, he said, "Haven't I always taught that it is always correct to help people? That it is always correct to give to others who are in need. And this monk, I mean, he's not just, haven't I always taught that it's correct to help strangers, to give to a stranger who's in need? And this person is giving to his parents. How can there be any fault in that? Um, and so one of the great things about this story is that, in many, many stories, like in Zen stories, this isn't a Zen story. This is a story that comes from, an ancient story in early Buddhism. But still, even in early stories about experiences like this with the monks or nuns or Zen stories, there's always like, and then he attained some realization or some enlightenment, or in Theravada Buddhism, they have different types of stages, sotapatti, fruition, or different things. You attain non-retrogression, up to and including now this monk. His goal, when he remember before, when he left the monastery, went out to practice on his own. His goal was to become an arhat, and some stories end with that. And then so and so became an arhat. It doesn't say that. It just says that the Buddha says uh, this monk is doing the right thing. He's helping his parents, and so it's a story about finding your own way. It's nice to have the Buddha come along and say you're doing the right thing, but the monk, was figuring it out on his own. Yeah. So this is probably going to be as much as I can talk about. Finding people to practice with, finding things that you can practice with other people, finding a teacher, a tradition, Korean, Japanese, Tibetan, whatever it might be, is great. Finding, living in the time of a living Buddha 2,500 years ago was also great for this guy. But he still had to figure it out for himself. He still had to find his own way. He had help. The Buddha helped him. His other fellow monks helped him. His parents helped him, and he helped them. Um, and you can say, and then he attained blah blah blah, whatever. But really, what he attained was his own practice, his own, which changes. It's not something you get, and then you don't have to work on it anymore. Finding your own practice is when the alarm goes off in the morning, you have to decide, get up and practice, hit the snooze button again. It's past time for practice to start. Do I show up late anyway? It's an everyday, every moment thing. And, like right now, I'm trying to figure out when and how do I end this Dharma talk, So I think this is probably a pretty good soft landing. So I haven't mentioned the Bhagavad Gita yet, and I've got like a minute and a half, so I'm going to throw the Bhagavad Gita in. And if you ask 10 people to give what are the 10, main lessons of the Bhagavad Gita, you'll get 100 answers, right? But one of them, the one that I really like, comes from a great modern day, fairly modern um, Hindu scholar and practitioner, Sri Aurobindo, who really emphasized what he called Swadharma, which is a Sanskrit word for one's own dharma. He said this is really, what the Bhagavad Gita is all about, finding your own dharma. And whether you like the Bhagavad Gita or not, whether you think, oh, Hinduism, what do we need with Hinduism? The Buddha got rid of that, right? But this idea of finding one's own dharma, that's what I'm talking about, and that's what I'm trying to do. Anyway, yeah, there. So now I got the Bhagavad Gita in, and so now I'll end. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all soon, either in person, online, practicing together. Thanks for being here, and thank you for seeing you in the future as well.